Welcome, everyone, to In the Driver's Seat, the podcast that is all about helping business owners build valuable and sellable companies. Myself, Simon Zryd, together with my partner, Steven Kohnke. We are both partner at Denver Business Coach. We co-host this podcast. We bring this conversation to you through the lens of exit planning. We're both certified value builder, certified exit planning advisors. We are passionate about working with small business owners in this last stage of building value and then preparing it for a successful exit. We did a lot of research at the end of last year. And one of the things that we realized is this conversation of value building needs to happen a lot sooner than when most business owners are starting it. Stephen is going to introduce a couple statistics that are really dear to our heart and that kind of inspired us. And then we have a fun topic planned for today. So I look forward to that.
Yeah. So part of our mission here is driven by these stats, as you mentioned. It's 3 out of 4 businesses that go to market to be sold are not sold. So 75% of the companies are not sold. The ones that are sold usually aren't sold at a price that the owner's going to be happy with. And why that becomes important is the second stat that we have is anywhere between 70 and 90% of a business owner's overall wealth is tied up in that business. So you have a 75% chance of it not selling, and a large portion of their wealth is usually tied up in that asset, in that business. So conversation and the reason why we're doing what we're doing is to help reduce or improve those stats, rather, get more businesses sold at a higher rate. That actually helps business owners fund whatever they're excited about to do next, whether it's retirement or another venture or investment, or whatever that next is. We want business owners to be able to do it. So that's why we exist here.
Yeah. And so today's topic is an interesting topic because I think it's one of the conversations we have a lot about with our clients that come to us, right? We ask them, what is your timeline for an exit? And, anywhere from 3 to 5 to 10 years to I'm not sure yet. And but we do know every business owner eventually is going to exit their business one way or another. And so we've also had conversation of like that their value building is something that's very intentional. It just doesn't happen by accident. Like there's specific metrics, whether they're tangible or intangible, that contribute to the valuation of a company. And so what we kind of want to maybe explore today in this podcast is, when is the right time to focus on building value? Because again, a lot of business owners, and we said that in the introduction, are starting this conversation too late. If you're a year out, 2 years out from I want to sell my business, and now you're thinking about value building, there's only so much that can happen, right? So if not at the very end, then when is the right time to focus on that? So we thought we'd explore that a little bit today. So what do you think, Stephen?
I mean, it's a great topic of conversation. I was having coffee with a strategic partner a couple of days ago, and this topic kind of came up randomly in the conversation of older baby boomer generation, the ones that are supposed to have I think it's up to like 13 or 14 trillion dollars of wealth transferred to the next generation through selling their companies, of how much of that is like potential versus what's actually going to happen, right? And I think there might be more potential transfer there than what will actually happen. And both him and I talked and had the same experience, rather, of speaking with some of these baby boomer business owners of, here's the scope of what we believe can improve the value of your company, the scope of work, rather, and this is probably how long that time will take. And a lot of them are not interested in doing the type of work that will make their company more valuable. And they're just saying, when the time comes, I'll work in this for a couple more years doing exactly what I'm doing now. And if I can sell it for a little bit, great. And if not, I'll just shut it down. And both him and I are like, there's so much more to be had out there.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's kind of a very long way to say what you've already alluded to. The earlier, the better. But I think we're kind of talking about before, is there too early of a time to be thinking about value? I think.
Mhm.
What,
Well, I think there are different type of business, because I was thinking about this. I think there's different type of business owners, that if you think about a serial entrepreneur, they know how to raise money, they have started a business, they have exited a business, they understand how teams work, they understand the market or particular customer segment really well, then I feel like you can go in with somewhat already like, hey, we're going to start this thing, we're going to build it for 10 years, we're going to sell it. Here's what we know is makes something valuable. And you're really intentional about start with the end in mind. Because you've also done it several times before, but for the most part, we know that businesses are started by technicians who at some point don't want to feel like they can make more money working for themselves than working for someone else, or they started for the freedom, time, money, and impact, etc. And most of those times, they're first-time entrepreneurs, and they kind of have like this concept of what it's going to take to run a business. Maybe they have some ideas of how to differentiate in the market. Maybe they have a different approach than what they've seen with competitors, and they're just starting out, right?
mm,
At that stage, I don't think value building per se is the conversation you're in.
mm,
Because I do think there is a stage where you just got to see if you personally have what it takes to be a business owner. There is a stage where you have to just drive leads and sales a lot. There's always this reality of you have an idea of, you come up with a business plan when you start out somehow, and you have an idea how that's going to happen, and then it gets shredded into pieces by the time it hits the market. And so there's a lot of like adjusting and how does my sales work? Like you're not really quite yet working on value building. You're just trying to get to break even, trying to get to figuring out your sales process, your lead generation process, to get to a certain level of calm. It might be still completely owner dependent. It might still have no worth per se, like it wouldn't be a transferable asset. But I feel like there's somewhere in there when you're like, you've got your core processes figured out.
mm.
It's still dependent. And now we're talking about increasing the capacity beyond just the owner, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know where your take is there.
I think from there, it's like the first struggle, right, is, does this work? Like, do people want to buy my service or product or whatever it is? Is there a market for it? Can I make sales? Can I get in front of the right people? Can I? Everything that it takes to get a business off the ground is being able to make money from that. So I think once that challenge, I guess, in the initial stage is sort of solved, and it's never really solved if you're trying to grow. There's always ways to improve, but there becomes a point where it's not like the only thing you are thinking about. And I think that is probably a pretty good point to be thinking about maybe some of the basics of what makes a business valuable. So, what is the sales process that you have been doing that ended up working? Because you probably tried 15 different ways to sell your service or sell your product. What ended up working? Write that down. From the infrastructure of the business, the how, being able to teach someone to do it. So I think it can start pretty quickly, but you got to be able to solve that first problem of, is this even something to do?
Yeah, I think I just read an article in, I think it was the Harvard Business Review, and it was
Hmm.
titled "Why Entrepreneurs Should Think Like Scientists." And and part of that was, like there are so many tools now to do business planning, like the business model canvas and all that, and you kind of come together with like a pretty solid go-to-market strategy, right? But it's all based on assumptions until, like I said, until you're really in the market. And I think to not assume things too early on, but to really stay curious in the beginning of, like, what's working? What is that messaging working? Is that product the right thing? Is the packaging the right thing? Is my team the right thing? Like, just be curious for a period of time and
Hmm.
really try different things, not in a just like an all over the place chaotic way, but with intentionality. What happens, you're in a as a scientist, you usually only change like one thing because you need to be able to see how one particular thing affects it.
Yeah.
So again, to your point, I think I do believe there is this stage of just being curious, trying different things, really, even though something might be working, maybe there's still better ways to do it. Maybe there's
Hmm.
more profitable ways, more higher conversion, better messaging, all that. Um, but then I think you said, okay, at some point as an owner, it personally, you go through this journey of like all you can think about is business break even, uh, day and night, and then at some point it relieves a little bit. I think there is something about understanding very early on what makes a business valuable, even though you might not intentionally like working towards it so much.
Hmm.
But read books like Built to Sell and understand value drivers, right? Like understand the concept of recurring revenue being more valuable than one-off revenue. Like,
Hmm.
and just
Owner independent. Yeah.
owner independent, and like know that if you're an owner independent business, you have a very hard time to sell something,
Yeah.
or customer concentration, and like those are things, even though you're not necessarily like implementing on it right now, having the awareness early on, I think is really important. Yeah.
I think from, talking with different business owners over the last, couple months, and understanding the different stages they're in, and even generational differences. There, the education component. I think there's some stats that actually back this up. I don't know what they are, but uh, the differences between generations of being able to understand the fact that I will exit and what kind of exit do I want to have is much more prevalent in a younger generation than the older than the
Mm-hmm.
generations. And I think I was having a conversation with someone who is in that. How do I get sales stage? She has one or two clients and she wants to be able to grow more. Um, but she says like one day I want to be able to sell this. I want to grow this to a point where it makes sense, where I can actually be able to do that. And I usually don't hear that from people who
Yeah.
are at that stage. So it was kind of cool to hear.
Yeah. I kind of like compare it to this conversation around we're introduced too late to certain principles, like even around retirement planning,
Mhm.
like the importance of compound interest. If most people would be exposed to that conversation at age 20
Mhm.
versus 35, 40, when they're like in earnest, start to think about like what a big difference it would make, right?
Mhm.
And so understanding the same thing, like this is understanding value building in that way, because the earlier you start and the earlier you understand the concept, which is not like crazy complicated, right? It's a lot of it is common sense to a certain extent. but it's like if you start out early, you can put a few $100 aside when you're in your 20s for your lifetime and you'd be okay. But if you start at 40, now you have to catch up a lot more in terms of truing things up in your business as well.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
yeah. So
There's a lot more like when they get to us and they've been in business for 20, 30 years and they've been doing something a certain way. It's there's a lot of stuff to break, I'll say.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
and rebuild in that way. So the earlier the message is heard and the more intentionality I think of growth there is, I think next couple generations are going to be in a much better position in the small businesses to make a lucrative transition and actually fulfill some of that 13, $14,000 trillion
yeah,
generational wealth transfer thing.
yeah. I think so. So we kind of like talked about like introducing these concepts as early as possible. There's nothing wrong with being aware of it, but
Yeah.
then there also is truly, we've talked about this in previous podcast episodes before. There truly is this change that occurs when an owner decides to sell,
Yeah.
even if it's 2, 3 years out at that point still. But once you're really clear, you're deciding to sell your business, what you're working on becomes very clear and tactical. And there's still a value building component in there because, again, like cleaning up the financials,
Mm.
looking like where is the risk for the buyer, and to me that is still value building. It's kind of cleaning the house and it's at the very end, but that's probably the most intentional phase of value building and getting it ready for an exit, right? And that is there's a clear line from when you're growing and evolving the business to now I'm going towards exit planning. Is there a distinction between value building and exit planning in that way, or does it still is? I mean, there's overlap for sure, right? But how would
Yeah, I do think there is a distinction. I was having a similar conversation some the other day, and she brought up value building versus exit planning, and I believe that there is maybe not a super clear distinction, but to me, value building is just a continuous process. It's just always, you do yourself. I always think of it as kind of like a Rolodex. Then you have your value building pieces and you do one and then put it at the back and then it comes back up eventually and you do it again and make it better, and that's kind of just a continuous process improvement mentality of you're always trying to build it more valuable. But when you're in that 3 to maybe even 5 year target depending on how long you've been doing the value building process, then there becomes a certain level of planning that isn't necessarily done in the value building piece. Like uh, personal planning, what are you going to do afterwards? Might be talked about, but we're not writing anything down and putting a plan together until we're in that exit planning phase.
Mhm.
And I think there's some other pieces in there that I think are more exclusive maybe that for preparing a business to be sold. You mentioned some
Yeah, around the
expenses.
financials,
Yeah.
expenses, contracts, etc., everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So getting some of those things really in order instead of just always doing this continuous process improvement. And I think a mentality of stability comes into play rather than growth as
hmm
well.
hmm Yeah, you might not reinvest. You want to show more profitability than reinvest into growth at that point, right? Yeah. So we have 3 stages, sounds like. The first stage is get your business up and running, be curious, learn as much as you can, go to break even. Don't worry so much about what the long-term future is going to look like unless you've done this several times before. But really, the more you're learning in your first few years, the more and even failing to some extent, the more likely
Mhm.
you're going to be successful. Then comes the stage of okay, now you're past break even point, you're profitable, you're really in a good growth curve, and that's where the continuous value building occurs, right, and should occur, and doing it intentionally in small steps rather than at the very end. And then the third stage is really now you've decided to sell and you're becoming very tactical about getting your business ready, go to market. And so I like that delineation a little bit. And yeah, I like that delineation. I think that's helpful. Yeah. Anything else for this for our listeners?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of the conversation. There's not, even before you have a business, I think it's good to educate yourself on what is a valuable company. So at least you go into it having an idea of where you're going, because as we know, 100% of business owners exit one way or another.
Yeah.
How do you want to exit is the big question. So just understanding when you get into business and with that intention going into it, I think is going to make a big difference. But there are different stages when it comes to exit and doing it successfully.
Yeah. I like, the book Built to Sell makes this conversation really approachable, without it being too much on the math side or on the intricacies of like you already have a business. Like I feel like you can read that book and understand some of the core principles, even if you're just starting out very early on. So that would be one of the resources that I would recommend. And then I always like if you're already planning for your business, the business reference guide provides industry snapshots and just like some narrative around industries and what exiting looks like and what some of the KPIs look like. I feel like one can engage with that even just as a backdrop as well, without having to get too detailed about anything. And then listening to our podcast.
Yeah, of course. Got the plug.
That's right. So I think with that, we're good to wrap it up for this week. Stephen, I know you're heading out of town in a little bit. Yeah. Was a pleasure as always. And we'll talk next week. I think next week we have a guest with us.
I believe so, yeah.
And we'll talk about the aspect that you alluded to, personal readiness, that plays a really important factor when you're getting to that exit stage. What's going to happen? How ready are you to exit the business? Not just how ready is the business. So look forward to that conversation.
All right, me as well. We'll talk soon.
Okay, thank you. Bye.